All right. Well, welcome, and I hope everyone is joining us today. We are excited to have Congressman Bob Goodlatte joining us from his office in Congress to talk a little bit about what's going on in Congress. And we have some specific questions that we're going to ask him submitted by our chamber businesses across the Commonwealth. A little bit about Congressman Goodlatte. I'm sure everyone in the Commonwealth knows him, but he represents the 6th Congressional District, stretching from Roanoke and Lynchburg to Harrisonburg, was first elected in 1992, serves on the House Agriculture Committee and is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He is the first Judiciary Committee chairman from Virginia in the last 125 years, and we're excited for that. Congressman Goodlatte, if you wouldn't mind saying hello to everybody and giving them a brief update on how things are going in Congress.
Well, Ryan, thank you very much. It's good to be with you and your chamber members, and I appreciate the Virginia Chamber of Commerce organizing this hangout, and we'll talk about some of the issues that members have sent in. But let me mention a few others. Starting out, we have here in the last several weeks developed some momentum in the Congress, which is saying a lot. The House and the Senate both passed budgets and then agreed upon a unified budget. It's the first time in more than a decade that has occurred, and that's very important. Not only do they agree upon a budget, but these budgets actually lead to balance. It takes too long, in my opinion, about 8 to 9 years, but it is still a major accomplishment to have both the House and the Senate appropriating dollars based upon agreed upon amounts, and not the unguided situation that we've been in for many years that has contributed to the substantial growth in our national debt. We also have been successful in passing through the House a bill to stop the federal government from gathering metadata. This is a problem that more and more people have become aware of. The government now takes literally billions of pieces of information about telephone calls are being made every single day and accumulates that. And then under certain circumstances, they can go to that database and ask questions of it. We think this is an infringement upon American civil liberties. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which sits in New York City, agreed with that and issued a ruling 2 weeks ago holding that. And in addition, this is a situation where if you start gathering data about telephone calls, the next thing you'll be financial information, healthcare information, whatever the case might be. Instead, the government should honor the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution and get the necessary orders to accomplish that. And so we passed a bill out of the House last week with 338 bipartisan votes. It was negotiated carefully with civil liberties representatives, but also with the intelligence gathering and law enforcement agencies. It has the support of the president, but it also has the support of the leadership on the House side in the Congress. So we're hoping the Senate will take that up this week and pass it and send it to the president for his signature. And I also want to, well, let's go ahead and take some of your questions, and I'll jump in with some other tidbits as we go along.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, you know, a little more background about you. We know that you've made quite a name for yourself as a leader on internet and high-tech issues. You serve as co-chair of the Congressional Internet Caucus and the International Creativity and Theft Prevention Caucus, an issue I know you're very familiar with and you've heard from the business community on a number of occasions related to it. But over the past decade, there's been a growing problem in the business community around the misuse of patents, also called patent trolling. In these cases, patents are obtained in order to file frivolous lawsuits against companies to halt their business, knowing that the cost of litigation is too expensive and that they'll settle out of court. Your reintroduction of the Innovation Act has put us on course to address this issue. What are the obstacles facing passage of this important legislation?
Well, this legislation was introduced in the last Congress and was very successful. Again, a very bipartisan piece of legislation, again, something that the administration supports, and it got about 325 votes in the House of Representatives. it was not taken up in the Senate. This was the last Senate, the Senate with a Democratic majority control, although, as I say, it's bipartisan, and it's bipartisan in the Senate as well as in the House. So we've reintroduced it in this Congress, and we've been working very closely with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and virtually every sector every business sector of our economy, because they all are getting hit by these patent trolls who will contact them. They might have a restaurant or a hotel, and the troll will claim that they have a patent on Wi-Fi, and if they don't pay them $10,000 or $20,000, they're going to bring a patent infringement action against them. Well, most businesses don't have a clue whether or not that's a valid patent or not, and they don't have the resources to spend millions of dollars in patent litigation, so they'll often wind up paying that money, and it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry each year. So this legislation makes it harder for these companies to engage in this kind of extortion, and it will, I think, strengthen our patent system by recognizing valid patents and making sure that the owners of those patents can enforce their rights, but it will also make frivolous and fraudulent lawsuits and demand letters and so on much more difficult. We have been, the Senate has introduced a similar bill, a bipartisan group of senators, and we've been pleased to see that development, and we hope to move forward with drafting, actually voting the legislation out of the Judiciary Committee very soon, and then bring it to the floor of the House not too long after that. We hope the Senate will take the same action, and that we can work out these differences. I already know from more than one conversation with President Obama that he's prepared to sign this legislation when we get it to his desk. So that should be our objective: make sure the Senate produces something this time, work out the difference between the House and the Senate, and get this done, so that Virginia businesses and businesses all across the country can breathe a little easier from this racket. I think it's really nothing more than extortion, where people try to use the cost of litigation as a means of getting people to pay money for something that they otherwise shouldn't have to pay any money for.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, thank you for your leadership on that issue, and we've seen it really start to impact the Main Street businesses. The mom and pop entrepreneurial spirit is being crushed by it to some degree. So really want to thank you for your leadership on that, and we look forward to helping advance that. But shipping.
And my bill in the House is called the Innovation Act.
Yes, sir.
Contact your senators and tell them you'd like to see them take it up as well. And while most of the members of the Virginia delegation voted for the bill in the last Congress, it never hurts for them to hear from their constituents, business owners in their district. You might tell them about a personal experience you've had, or if you're simply worried about the problem and want to see this good solution, let your House members know wherever you are in the state that you'd like to see them support the Innovation Act.
Absolutely. And we're going to do our best on our end to engage folks as well to take action on that and reinstitute their in favor of it. Switching gears a little bit over to energy. Another question submitted by, actually this came up on multiple questions we got from our membership, but the EPA's Clean Power Plan has created a great deal of uncertainty and concern in the business community. At the Chamber's Energy and Sustainability Conference last month, Governor McAuliffe actually said that the current wording is unfairly penalizing Virginia by not giving us credit for our investments in nuclear energy. We're being treated a little differently than our surrounding states. What are your hopes and expectations of the Clean Power Plan's final regulations that are set to come down from the EPA this summer?
Well, I'm hoping that in the Congress we'll continue to push back against them, because while we all want to make sure that we have clean air, we also want to make sure that we're using common sense and taking a pragmatic approach. And Virginia has a number of different ways to produce energy. One of the most important is nuclear power. Better than 30%, I think close to 40% of the electricity generated in Virginia comes from nuclear power. And Lynchburg, which is in the 6th Congressional District that I'm proud to represent, is a major center for nuclear power. We have both the fuel for our nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines, as well as the maintenance of many, many nuclear power plants across the whole country, originating out of Lynchburg. It creates thousands of jobs there, and I want to make sure that that continues. So getting credit for the nuclear industry, which has zero emissions of CO2 gases, is something that is a real flaw in the way the government is undertaking to regulate this. But I must say I'm also concerned that we have the opportunity to produce other sources of energy as well, including those that emit carbon, like coal and oil and natural gas. I'm for drilling offshore Virginia to find more oil and natural gas. I am for making sure that we're doing everything possible to promote clean coal technology, which hasn't been given nearly the help that it deserves, and has been very harmful in the western part of Virginia in terms of the economic impact of this administration's war on coal. We do want to see more wind power and solar and other alternative forms of energy, but they do not have the kind of reliability, particularly in Virginia, to sustain the needs of a very, very large and right now healthy economy. But higher electric rates and other costs for energy could easily put us into a situation where we're cutting back on the number of jobs rather than growing jobs in Virginia.
Absolutely. And we've been long concerned about the overreach of the EPA to some degree in these regulatory agencies handing down some stiff penalties and things like that to states as we move forward. And regulatory reform has been a long concern of the business community, and we know there is a balance there. But from our research at the Chamber, it's estimated that regulations coming from the federal government cost private businesses $1 trillion annually. How do you propose balancing the needed regulations that everyone agrees is important to public health and safety, while also ensuring that government regulations don't stifle our economic growth?
Well, to put it simply, the government, including the Congress, needs to do a better job of passing legislation that regulates the regulators. You're right. We need to have a clean environment, and you need some regulations for that. We need to have safe workplaces. You're going to have some regulations for that as well, but they need to be founded in common sense. They need to be based upon cost-benefit analysis. They need to reflect the fact that smaller businesses can be unfairly burdened by regulations. They don't have the ability to spread the cost of implementing a regulation the way a large business does. But whether they're a large business or a small business, if it's a major new regulation, it should have to come back to the Congress for a final vote, an up or down vote, on whether or not the regulations that have been written to either implement a new law or to change regulations. You know, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, they've been around since the 1970s. So when we talk about these regulations coming from the Obama administration, what they've done is they have, to use the words of the president, they've taken their pen and their cell phone and not gone back to Congress to get new laws. What they've done is taken existing laws to find new ways to try to accomplish things that were never intended when the laws were passed way back in the 1970s. So I say, whether it's a new law or whether it's an old law and they're changing the regulations, either way, if it's going to have a major impact in terms of cost, and the figure that we've used is $100 million, a new regulation that costs $100 million nationwide, spread amongst all the businesses, all the consumers, and so on. That's not a tremendous amount of money, but it's enough to not tie up the Congress in small matters. If it costs that much money, it should come back to the Congress, and the Congress should have an up or down vote to say whether the new regulations are what Congress intended under the law or not. If they are, and the Congress votes to allow them to move forward, then fine. But if they are not, and Congress refuses to vote to allow them to move forward, then the bureaucracy should have to go back to the drawing board and come up with more practical regulations. We also have passed legislation that has come out of the House Judiciary Committee. We've also passed legislation out of the committee that would speed up the licensing and permitting process for major projects of any kind. Sometimes important projects can take 15, 20 years to get the necessary permits from federal government agencies. And legislation introduced by another member of the Judiciary Committee, Congressman Tom Marino of Pennsylvania, would make it stricter in terms of what timetable the government bureaucracies have to adhere to. They're great at requiring businesses to adhere to timetables. They should have to adhere to timetables themselves about when and how they're going to make decisions about applications to undertake major construction projects and other different projects around the state and around the country.
Yeah, and that economic impact, looking at that and considering that when making those regulatory decisions is something that the chambers of commerce across the country have been advocating for, and it really has gotten a lot of steam on a bipartisan level, and it seems to be a common sense approach to reining in some regulators who really don't have to answer to the public.
Right. Other bills that we passed deal with making sure that regulators take into account the impact that their new regulations will have on small businesses. Also having greater sunshine in the process. For example, sometimes there'll be a group that will sue the federal government for implementation of some change in regulations, and the government agency will enter into a sweetheart deal with this. It might be an environmental group, might be a labor union. Who knows what the plaintiff is going to be in this case? But the people who are impacted by it the most, the employees who work at businesses who might lose their job because of a change in regulation, not based upon how the normal regulation process works, but based upon a lawsuit where basically somebody sues the government says, okay, we'll do it that way. And then before you know it, they have a consent decree that requires a change in the way things are done. And the businesses and employees of those businesses and others who are affected by that had no ability to participate in the process because they didn't even get notice. They had no opportunity to join the lawsuit and speak up for the common sense that should be a part of that, and often is not when these kinds of deals are reached between government agencies and different groups that want to implement new regulations but can't get them passed through the more transparent process that we have set up and designed, the Administrative Procedures Act, for how regulations are changed.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to have a more stringent burden on top of smaller businesses who don't have the compliance officers and everything else at their disposal to be able to figure out and how to comply with them, or even knowing that they existed. There's so many of them coming at them each day. It becomes a big burden on small businesses to figure out how to actually be in good compliance. So,
agreed.
Well, thank you very much for your leadership on that. We appreciate it. Switching a total different gear here, but something you've seen in the news, and I know you're following closely with its impact on the 6th Congressional District. But an important industry is the poultry producers. And across the nation right now, they're fighting to prevent a spread of a highly contagious strain of the avian flu. At least 9 states have confirmed the cases of it. What is happening right now at the federal level to help prevent the spread of this disease?
Well, that's a very important subject that we're watching very closely in my district, because between chickens and turkeys, the 6th District of Virginia is one of the largest, if not the largest, poultry producing districts in the nation. And we've been fortunate that it has not struck our area yet. But back in 2002, and then again back in the 1980s, there were serious avian flu outbreaks in the Shenandoah Valley that cost farmers many, many millions of dollars. When these outbreaks occur, and this is a particularly deadly one for poultry, when it occurs, the best way to stop it is to eradicate the flocks in these large poultry houses. Well, that can cause rather severe economic harm to the individual who's required to eradicate even healthy birds in order to keep them from, when they're moved to the processing plants, spreading the disease. So we need to make sure that there are emergency funds available to help the places around the country that have been hit hard. Minnesota has been the place hit the hardest, and make sure that those resources are still available if it should hit the Shenandoah Valley, which some people say could happen in the fall. We don't even know exactly how it's transmitted. Could be through wild birds like ducks that have migratory paths and could be coming back down from Canada through Virginia later in the year. It also can be brought into the poultry houses, maybe on people's shoes or clothing. And so you've got to make sure that they're following all of the safety measures to make sure that nothing from the outside gets inside the poultry house. And there are measures ongoing to accomplish that. So I know that the poultry industry works very closely with both the state Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make sure that all the measures are being properly taken to keep this disease from spreading. It will have a tremendous impact on poultry farmers, of which I have a great many in the Shenandoah Valley. But if it's not eradicated soon, it's going to also have a dramatic impact on the price of chicken and turkey for consumers.
Lots of chain reactions that can happen from that. Well, switching to something that has, well, this is a issue that is new relatively to this year's bird flu, and something that's been long present in Congress is, there's been a long discussion and debate in Congress centered on the taxation of online sales. In a discussion draft released earlier this year, your proposal would give states limited power to tax online sales. Could you share with our members your thoughts on the status of your alternative to the Marketplace Fairness Act?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is an issue that I am very familiar with, worked with for a long time. And for a long time, I expected the states would work together and form a compact and come back to the Congress with a way for that compact to enable them to get the revenues from online sales that in some instances they do not get now. Many online sales, the tax is collected. Amazon, for example, now collects on all of its sales in Virginia and in about half of the states. But there are some substantial businesses and many small businesses that are not required to collect sales tax online because they're located outside of the jurisdiction where the tax is due, and the state has no regulatory power to regulate that business. Our concern about the Senate bill is that instead of working out a cooperative way to collect the tax, the Senate basically, the Marketplace Fairness Act would simply give to states the ability to reach out and regulate businesses outside of the state's jurisdiction. I and many others in the House think that is a very bad precedent that translated into other areas of government regulation could mean that you'd have, instead of just one national government regulating interstate commerce, and it doesn't always do the best job of that, but it has clear constitutional authority to do that. But to add to that 50 different states also regulating, if you want to sell a particular product in your state. California right now tells egg producers that if they want to sell eggs in California, they got to produce it to the specifications of the state of California. Well, if every state did that, then a poultry producer trying to sell in more than just their home state would be confronted with a very difficult way to do business. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want the Congress to be setting that precedent. So we proposed an alternative way for the states to collect the sales tax, and require businesses in their own jurisdiction to collect the tax, whether the sale is made in the state or outside of the state. And then we've come up with a mechanism for the states to share that revenue. And in discussions back and forth between retailers, both large, big box retailers that sell in most, if not all, the states, and smaller retailers as well, we have been sharing ideas and have come up with yet another version of how to do that. A few weeks ago, last week, or actually the week before last now, they came back with a series of questions which we answered, and now we're waiting to hear back from them. But we're hoping to find a way to not only solve this problem of how states can get the fair revenue without unfairly regulating the internet and unfairly regulating businesses that are outside of their jurisdiction. But we also want to take up other legislation that deals with things like business activity taxes that many businesses are required to file, that every state has different standards for what constitutes nexus with the state, what constitutes sufficient business contact with the state. That bill gives a clear, bright line test of that. People who have income in a multitude of states, they get treated unfairly when it comes time to paying their state income taxes, and we have the mobile workforce bill, which resolves that. And then you have the whole issue of goods that are no longer tangible, things like movies and music and books and software that are simply sold in a digital format. How do you tax those? We have legislation to give clear guidance to that as well. Separately, we have passed through the House in the last Congress, and we'll do again in this Congress, an extension of the moratorium on state and local taxation of access to the internet. If we want the internet to grow and more people to have access to it, including especially lower income people, we've got to make sure we keep taxes low on this important tool that virtually every business nowadays uses. And that Internet Tax Freedom Act, which I have reintroduced in this Congress, would do just that.
Great, we appreciate it. It's certainly a complicated issue that I know is getting worked out, and appreciate your leadership on that. I think we got time for one last question, and this one certainly came up multiple times in our members submitting questions. Was the one thing we always hear about is from our member companies is having access to talent. Immigration is a big issue and is another complicated issue for sure. But what does Congress need to do in order to ensure balanced and sensible immigration policies that will attract and retain the brightest minds and the hardest workers from across the world?
Well, here in the House, we've taken a step-by-step approach to immigration reform, starting with enforcement, and that has taken on a new life since the border surge last summer, where large numbers, dramatically increased numbers of people, particularly from Central American countries, were entering the United States illegally and abusing our immigration laws. Our so-called catch and release program administered by the Obama administration, based upon what we think is a misinterpretation of the law. That law needs to be changed, and Congressman John Carter from Texas has introduced a bill to solve that problem. Abuse of our asylum laws. Political asylum is a very important thing for people who are fleeing government persecution in their home countries. That has been abused in this process. The federal government has removed participation in the enforcement of our immigration laws from state and local governments. That has been especially true with the Obama administration. We think that given the number of law enforcement agencies around the country and the small number of federal government officers charged with enforcing these laws in the interior of the country, not utilizing and giving state and local governments the opportunity to participate is a big mistake. And finally, we need to have mandatory electronic verification of employment, where 580,000 businesses around the country voluntarily use that today. But if you have it so that everybody uses it, it cuts off the magnet for people coming here illegally. Now, when you do all of these things, it will become increasingly apparent that there are certain sectors of our economy where there's a shortage of workers, particularly in agriculture and in some high-skilled areas as well. And so following on the 5 enforcement bills, 4 that I mentioned from the Judiciary Committee and 1 from the Homeland Security Committee that have passed out of those committees, and we would like to see brought to the floor of the House to build the support of the American people for immigration reform, because we know that they insist that we start with enforcement of the law. That's what they want to see. Then you go on to reform the legal programs like the agricultural guest worker program, and we have a bill introduced by Congressman Issa of California called the Skills Visa Act that would provide more H-1B non-immigrant visas for high-skilled workers, particularly in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, also healthcare, but also those who want to come to live permanently in the United States. People who are educated in American universities in these highly scientific and highly skilled fields can go back home to their home country. They can go to another country that competes with the United States for talent and start businesses, or go to work for businesses in those countries and compete with us, or we can keep them here and help grow jobs by growing the technology sector. Very important, not only in Northern Virginia, but many parts of the state now, including the Roanoke and New River valleys down in my part of Virginia that have an increasing number of companies that are in need of good STEM workers. And that bill would help fill that need.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. It's all about competing and attracting that talent and retaining that talent. So with that, this concludes our broadcast of the Google Hangout with Congressman Bob Goodlatte. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, you've always got plenty on your plate, but we appreciate what you do for the Commonwealth, and we really hope that we can continue this discussion and dialogue with you going forward.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be with you and your members.
Thank you so much.